Bob Kinford is our first speaker. Bob, are you ready?
Yeah, let me just hit the share screen and get this pulled up.
Okay, well, very good. Well, we appreciate Bob being willing to be here. We're grateful for his contribution to the regenerative agriculture cause. Grateful that he's perpetuating the legacy of stockmanship and doing it in his own unique way. And I think the quote comes to mind that if we want to become if we want to become an expert, we study the masters, we learn the rules. And then if we want to become a master, we break the rules and we add our own flair. And so I think that's really what it takes. And that's what our hope is, that you guys can become masters of your own craft, masters of your own business. The principles, if you try to apply them by the book based on what somebody does on their operation, you're likely going to fail. Just like Tony said, it may not fit our context. So learn the rules and then be willing to break the rules. Maybe you've broken a rule or two in your life, huh, Bob?
What's the rule?
I don't know. You talked a little bit about it
Uh,
yesterday, right? The straight lines, the parallel,
okay.
the things that
Um,
we think, well, man, we that's the only way to move cattle.
yeah, it's when I started out trying to teach this, I didn't even have a name for it. People want to call it herding. It isn't herding because you don't have to be there every day. Uh, and trying to get people to to get this, and it's really simple. But I finally, here just recently, figured out that I'm breaking 6 paradigms at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get somebody that's locked in any certain paradigm, and one of the biggest ones is the stockmanship, because Bud didn't teach this, so therefore if Bud didn't teach it, you can't be doing it. This picture here is a few months after I was at this place for a school. These cattle are coming off water, and this is the way they're grazing off water. And like I say, it's really simple, but we have to realize the paradigms. And to do that, we need to understand, how we develop our paradigms, why, and why we hang on to them. Anyway, our beliefs are based on what we perceive as fact, and that's based upon what we've been taught by others and our own observations. And we start getting these paradigms from the time we're little. It's everything from religion to stockmanship to uh, anything you can imagine, politics, uh, whether or not Wendy's is better than McDonald's, any of it. And if we get new observations or education that's contrary to our experience, then we tend to reject the new. And we're taught from, the time we're little, you got to respect your elders. You got to pay attention to those people in school. You've got to pay attention and really know what's in those books in order uh, to advance your knowledge. But the problem is with uh, going to college. Now, I didn't go to college. I bought all the books that a person going to college for an animal science degree in range management would have bought. The difference is if you're going for that degree, you're forced to take and agree with everything they say in the book in order to get that piece of paper that says you're smart and went to college. And on the other hand, somebody like me that just buys the books, we can go, that doesn't really work. And it's like I started following Alan Savory's work back in the 70s, and I really liked everything about it but the fences, because it seemed to me that we should be able to get cattle to graze as a herd, something that bothered me since I was a little kid. And I would ask somebody, well, how come your sheep and your goats all graze together? Your horses are all in the same part of the pasture, but your cows are scattered out from one end to the other. And the answer was always the same. Well, that's what they do. Now, the picture on here is the third day of one of the schools. It was in Nebraska. They broke up that night. The only thing we can think of is there was some fires around, and maybe a herd of antelope or a herd of deer or something scattered right through the middle of them and scattered them out. But that right there is 285 pair on approximately a quarter acre. So, it's not the flies or anything. That's just they found where they wanted to graze, and they started grazing out at that density. So, in order to change your paradigm, you have to have doubt in it. And most of us are so locked into our paradigms that we don't want to change them. And when those of you that are ranchers and you want to take and send somebody to school, you have to realize there's a really strong sense of how to put it, just an attitude that people want to keep their jobs. So you say you need to go to this school and learn this. Oh yeah, we'll go. But if they're not really willing, they're just doing it just to please you. They go to the school, they don't pay attention, might even be disruptive, and then they go back and say, oh well, that doesn't work. So the best way to figure out if they really want to go is if they express an interest in learning a new method to you, send them, because they're willing to learn, they're willing to expand, and unless you can be sure that they're going to do it, it's likely to be a waste of money. But if they're expressing the willingness, they want to learn this, then send them, because it's going to benefit the operation. And on this picture here, this was a little lease I had down here in Texas. This had been bare ground for over 20 years, and this was going into the third year of the IMG program. So you can get some pretty dramatic results with actually very little work once you get around the paradigms. Now, we all think we're good at observation, but we have to realize that we don't observe things in the same way. And say there 20 people can observe the same event and wind up with 20 different observations, and that the memories of those observations are going to vary from their original observation within 24 hours. I had a teacher in high school who he would have been thrown in jail today for this, but he had his desk was in the back of the room, and there was a kid that was kind of a troublemaker, and this kid starts being disruptive, and the teacher threatened him. He said, next time you make a sound, you're getting it. Well, the kid gets up, he walks into the door, and he slams it. And the teacher just kind of chews everybody out. And the kid comes back in the door, slams the door, and a gunshot rings out. The kid falls on the floor, and everybody just panics, just starts running. And at the end of it, he got everybody back together, and he goes, okay, I want everybody to write down what happened. So everybody wrote down what happened, and he collected papers up. The next morning, or the next afternoon, he had everybody write down their memories of that event. Now, the interesting thing was there was like 35 different kids in that group. There were 35 different descriptions of what happened, of the same event. And then he read, had us write down what we'd seen the day before, and he would read the description a person had the day before and the description of what happened in his memory 24 hours later, and it was totally different. So we don't observe near as good as we can. We need to have some doubt. I mean, some people tell me I've got a lot of confidence and stuff. No, I've got self-doubt. I am constantly rechecking myself. Now, the other thing here is that we do things on autopilot, and we're totally oblivious to how we're doing them. it's because we're doing it all the time. We don't have to think about how to ride the horse. We don't have to think about how we're working the cow. We're doing it. We know how to do this. So our egos really get wrapped up in this. And I ran into it with several people, but I mean, I used to ride a lot of rank horses when I was younger. I had my shingle out. I'm training horses in Albuquerque, and this guy had seen me working some colts that were he thought they were broncs. They'd just been range raised and halter broke a week before. So he had a horse that was a bronc, had bucked off his trainer every day for 90 days, and he wanted to see if I could do anything with it. Well, I was going over to his place to do it because I didn't have any more room in where I had horses stabled. And he comes in, and I'm two-tracking the horse around the corner. And those of you that don't know, you've got the horse at a little bit of an angle. You're moving in a straight line, but like if you're in an arena, your horse's head will be pointing towards the fence, and you'll be going down, and you'll be making two distinct set of tracks. And that's just something that I accidentally stumbled on with broncs out in the desert, and I just started doing it. And so he asked me, well, how'd you get it to two-tracking so fast? And I had a hard time convincing him that I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. You know, what's two-tracking? I don't understand. And he starts explaining to me, and I go, oh, like this? And I just pick up the horse and I did it. And he goes, yeah, like that. Just, how do you get that horse to do that? And I didn't have a clue. So he was going in for lunch, and he says, when I come out, I want you to tell me how you're getting this to happen. So I just started going down the fence, picking them up and doing it, going both ways. And when he came out, I could figure out how I was shifting my weight, the pressure I was using with my legs. But as far as my hands go, to this day, I really don't know what I'm doing with them. It's so much give and take. It's like playing a piano. So when we're trying to learn new things, we've really got to think about what we're doing. And unless we're consciously thinking about it, we're not going to do it. And that's what Pedro Dominguez in here, one of my better students, and he's up in Montana running the Fort Belknap bison herd and the one for American Prairie Reserve. And he was arguing with me, this is what I did. And I said, no, you didn't. So we finally got it straightened out. He went ahead and he did it again, was really thinking about it, and he managed to do what I was asking him to do the right way. But we've got to think about what we're doing. Now, at the present time, we've got two basic choices for regenerative grazing. Actually, three if you want to count actual herding. The first one is fences with frequent or even multiple daily moves, along with a complex infrastructure or daily herding with multiple riders. And we all think that we need to build night corrals to maximize bedding impact. Well, this picture here was on Alejandro Carrillo's place. I'm sure everybody's fairly familiar with him. And all we did is we set those cows up on this area right here a little bit before dark, and we walked off and left them. We come back the next morning, they get up, and boy, we had little pats and urine puddles and tracks just all over that. So you can either do this by pulling the cattle up there and kind of rodeering them, which once you get your stockmanship straight, one person can do it with about as many cattle as you want. You don't need to have multiple riders. One person can easily be making their moves with 1,000, 1,500 cows. So instinctive migratory grazing, we break paradigms on multiple levels, and it's better suited to larger acreages. The thing is that the stockmanship, if you use this stockmanship on a smaller place, you're going to get some of the benefits of how this changes how cattle will graze. It generally requires no additional fencing. It requires fewer water points than systems depending on fencing, and it usually requires no daily labor. Ricky Kremer's up in Lusk, Wyoming. I'm sure some of you have heard of her. When they first started this, they were actually working on other ranches 180 days out of the year. They would go for up to 2 weeks when the only time they'd see their cows was in the headlights at night when they were checking water. And at the end of 2 weeks, they go to make their pasture move, and they had an even graze across the whole pasture. It might be 800, 900, or 1,000 acres, and one person could go out there and pick them up and go because they would all be together. And it allows for more flexibility than fencing systems. It's something we don't generally think about. You know, we're all interested in grazing at the right time, but if you've got 20, 30,000 acres or more, Jared, I'm sure you've got a lot more than 20,000 acres that you're grazing. That whole place isn't going to be hitting the optimum at the same exact time, and you cannot. It would be physically impossible for you to get to the whole thing at the exact time. But you may have a situation where 5 miles back you'll be driving out to where the cows are to go check the water or adjust them, and you go by a spot and you notice, say, you've got a bunch of cockleburs that have come up and they're in the 4-leaf stage. Well, if you've got all these little paddocks around and it's 5 miles away, well, you've got a lot of gates to go through. But with this, you just pick them up, go back down there, they'll drop into there, wipe that out, and then you can pick them up and take them back to wherever you want. And you don't need to do the corral system because it automatically creates high density bed grounds without building any corrals. This shot right here is an example of that. If you think back a couple of slides where I had those cows on green grass and I said it'd been bare ground, this was the second year of that general area. This is what that whole place in there looked like, but my cattle were coming off water and they would go down and they would bed down together like that, and every day they're moving into a different place. Fernando Falamir's cows are doing the same thing. They'll leave the grass and the brushy areas where they're at to ruminate at night, and they'll go up and they'll lay down in a different spot, and they're creating the same impact that you would get for going through the labor of building a corral in a different spot every day. Now, I'm going to get into really the paradigm change part, and this has been a problem I've had, and trying to figure out how to work around this. I mean, Bud Williams was great, and he did a lot of good. If you notice here that this link up here at the top, that was my original website that I still have just for my books and stuff. And I'd written some articles, and I just sent a couple to Bud to see if I needed to tweak them or if he agreed with them or whatever. And his result was to put me on the website. And I'll show you the diagrams that go with that article here in a second. And it's not what Bud taught. And we have this tendency, well, I already know how to handle cattle properly, and if Bud Williams didn't teach it, it isn't right. Now, Jared, you had Eunice on here last month, and what was one thing that she said that really stuck out that everybody should have grasped on? And that was the fact that as much as Bud knew, he was still learning up till the time he died. And the other thing that stuck out and actually kind of got me going onto this rabbit hole, you had Dawn, I can't remember how to pronounce her last name. I think it's Hightow, but it's
Don Nato.
yeah, okay. Now, if you think back to her presentation, she was, saying how hard it was for her to grasp things at first, but then she said that you would see Bud do things with cattle that you couldn't explain. You couldn't figure out how to do it, and if you asked him, he would just grin at you. Well, my first meeting with him, I asked him about some of the things that I'm doing, and he says they work really well, but they're too advanced to teach. And so what I'm teaching isn't necessarily what Bud taught, but it is all things he did. It follows what his philosophies are pretty well. So we need to change this from I already know how to handle cattle, and if Bud Williams didn't teach it, it isn't right, to Bud believed some methods were too advanced to teach and wouldn't mention them unless asked about them directly. And that is that's a hard one for people to get around. But anyways, my first article I sent him was going out of gate. And normally if you got you're pulling cattle in a feedlot, you got a guy down here in the gate, one that's being hard to move, and that cow ducks out in between them. So what's the reaction of both guys? Boom, we got to get to the head to get it to turn around. The reaction is that cow just squirts right through them. So I got these out of order somehow. Anyways, this is kind of out of order, but instead of the guy from in the gate trying to get to the head and the guy bringing it getting to the head, the guy bringing it needs to slide out and take that pressure off so that cow starts looking someplace else. If the guy then comes down the fence and cuts across that hip, that cow will speed up a little bit, but he's looking over his shoulder trying to see, what this other guy is doing, and he sees the gate and they go out the gate. Pretty simple concept. But I tell you what, trying to get guys in a feedlot to do that instead of trying to beat that cow to the gate every time, it's like run your head across the cheese grater. Okay, now paradigm change number 2. And this is another one that this is a Bud deal. And that cattle naturally graze away from each other. Well, why do you think that? Because that's all you've ever seen and you've never questioned it. So to kind of get around this paradigm, you need to ask yourself, why would a herd animal scatter out and graze away from each other? And then you're changing it to stockmanship methods can be used to modify cattle to exhibit the same herd behavior as wild herbivores, with all of the animals grazing together in the same direction is possible. It's not only possible, it's easy. You just got to get yourself wrapped around all this. Another thing that we need to start doing is realizing that every reaction a cow has is just a natural reaction to what we're doing. Cattle will not follow the rules if we are not in position. In a lot of this, we can think we're in position, but we're not. We talk about cattle slowing down when we go the same direction and speeding up if we're going against them. But you've got a wide range of space in there where you've got one area, they're not even going to pay attention to you. You've got another area that, yeah, they're going to slow down. And then you've got another area where they're going to feel like they're getting chased. And we need to differentiate between those and realize that we can change our horse's body position, still be going the same direction as them or against them, and get a lot more power because our horses are more focused on what they're doing. So on rebooting herd instinct, we train the stockman, not the stock. There's been a big misconception here, and I've had people that can talk to me for an hour and a half, doing an interview, write an article, and then they come out and talk about how we're training the livestock. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. If you use the right stockmanship, they'll come together on their own. And using the correct stockmanship, you need to work at the speed of the cow, and that herd gets rebooted organically. There's been, if anybody remembers the Roe Deer project with Whit Hibbard and Matt Barnes, they were trying to duplicate this. They didn't want to pay me to go up and do a school, and I can't afford to just to do it for free. But Matt kept sending me little video clips, and we're talking back and forth about what's going on. And they couldn't break out of the bud paradigm and of starting them up from the back, and they would sit there. They wouldn't just leave them alone, because once you get to the point where they're grazing, we walk off and leave them alone, and we mess with them again the next day. And every day they just start kind of coming back closer together, even though we're not doing anything to hold them. Well, they were taken, and they would bump on one cow that was kind of going out to the side where they didn't want it. And about 5 minutes later, another cow on the other side would start moving out. So they would bump that one back in. And then a few minutes later, one would bump out on the other side. So basically it was like they were playing pong with cows at slow motion. So it reboots organically, but it's nothing with training the stock. It is their reaction to what we're doing. Now, stockmanship is a lot like horsemanship. And it's like Tom Dorner's talking about timing, balance, and feel. I throw in there focus, because if you're not focused on your horse can't be focused on what it's doing. And if you're not focused on the cow has a harder time, because we're just communicating with these animals. We're not trying to make them do something as much as we're creating our communication to where they're going to react the way that we want. And my number one pet peeve statement anybody ever makes is getting the eye. We don't need to worry about getting their eye, because unless you're in the blind spot, you have their eye. We're thinking we need to put pressure on the eye. All we need to do is communicate to that animal, in a way to where they react to us the way we want them to react. Make the right thing easy and the hard thing difficult. And if the animal isn't doing what you want, it's because you're out of position and focus are not conducive to the results you desire. Now, this is what I call a fade turn, and it's something that people have a hard time grasping. What do we do when we turn with a cow? We get parallel to it and try to get up there to turn it. But if you take pressure off of it as you come around with it, that animal will automatically slow down and just turn around and go back to the other cows. So see how fast that works so fast that it's not even fun. Slow it down here. It starts going, and as soon as it starts going, as soon as I start make that point where I'm turning away from it, it just lets down and goes into the other cows. Now this cat one here, as soon as it didn't even take a big move. As soon as I made that move, that animal slowed down and turned back into the cows. And this is one of those things that people just have a hard time wrapping your mind around. And you can't teach it. That's one thing that I need to make clear, and it sounds kind of maybe stupid for an instructor to tell you that they can't teach you anything. All I can do is teach you the concepts, walk you through the concepts, and get them to where you're starting to understand them. But the biggest part of this isn't just the concepts, it's developing the field. And if you don't want to develop the field, you're going to have a difficult time. Okay, this is from a school in Mexico. It was the second day of the school. This is roughly half the herd right here. We were getting to bumping them to where they're going to water, where those cattle are balled up there in the back. There was a leak in the water line that they kind of hung up on. And I just decided to let these go out because this is a perfect example of a natural start on cattle. They're going out at their own rate of speed. And if you look at this, what are these cows in the back doing? Those cows in the back aren't doing anything. You get a gap in there where these cows feel comfortable to go, they pick up and go. They're going at the speed and at a distance that they're comfortable with. So you can't, if you're back here on the back, what's happening? You're pushing them up, you're pushing the back through the front. And how relaxing is that? That's like if you're sitting in traffic and the light turns green and everybody starts honking at you to get out of the way because the light's green and you can't go because you got 2 or 3 cars up ahead of you between you and the light. So you want to start the cattle out in a natural way like this and start them out in the direction that you're going from the direction that you're going. Because you can approach these cattle and have them from behind and have them turn around and go the way that you want them to go without any problem. You just have to grasp the concept and be patient. Okay, this is another thing that I think gets really misconstrued on working the at a tee to the gate. This is 250 head of fresh weaned calves. Some of them had only been weaned 3 days before this, had been hauled, and I moved them 3 miles over and put them in this water lot, and I'm putting them in the water lot. And once I got them started, I just let them go. See, there's no pressure on the back of this. They're standing there. These ones are walking up calmly. And as I move up the side, these other ones kind of start up a little bit. But there's no pressure from the back of them. They can see you coming and they know to go by. Not sure what caused that, but if you notice, it speeds up. Now watch this. Boom. It just gets right there in back of them. Now, when this here is a, okay, I'll just skip into this. This was in Australia, working with a deal on Roger Savory. Turn the volume off. I'm trying to get this gal here to quit going into the back. And that dog, I've got this gal up here, put some pressure on from the front. We're letting them line out and going up here. Now, they're going up, and as you can see, once again, their motion, sending her up to keep them from spreading out and kind of tip them into there a little bit. The ones in the back are fine. They're not going anywhere, and they're just moving up as they get room. Now watch that horned cow right there, because I'm going to cut her off. Now, I don't know if you caught that because it was pretty quick, but all I did is that horse looked at it and I moved to the side. Once again, we're emptying out a pen here. She's at the front, I'm at the side, we had 2 gates open. And the interesting thing about this is this was a job I was doing for Roger Savory. These cows, they had not been worked with horses until about 3 weeks before we did this, and we had 2,800 of them going as a herd. But we're not putting any pressure on the back. Their reaction is to go around you or by you, so you set them up to be able to do that. Okay, okay, now this one here's another deal. We talk about this, another one that just breaks paradigm. If you have wild cows, boy, they're wild, and you can kind of get them calmed down. Well, I had 60 head of cows on this deal, which were trading cows that the owner of the property had sent me, and they came from 2 different ranches. And the first load was only about 2 hours late, and that was because it took them 2 hours longer than they thought it was going to take to get them into the pens out of their little shipping trap. The second load was supposed to be in there by noon, but it didn't get there till 9 o'clock at night because it took them till 1 o'clock in the afternoon to get them into the set of pens. And this is after having them for about a month, maybe 5 weeks. And I was going to have to move a bunch of calves across this pasture and into another pasture. And I didn't want these cattle being not necessarily in the way, but acting as a magnet for those calves. So I went out to move them. I got out a little bit late. These cattle were already heading out away from water. And I got there and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I turned my horse towards the cattle that were leaving and took about 2 steps, and they started coming back in. So I got my camera out to do this. This is from being wild and not wanting to have anything to do with anybody on a horse. These are the ones that were still hadn't quite left yet. And look at the speed these are coming. Look at those calves. They're happy. They got their tails up. They're running and playing, and everything's coming back in because they want to see what's going on. This is not baiting cattle with cake or feed. This is just straight off the stockmanship. Turn these cows around from wanting to run away to actually, if you position yourself right, when you go out to the pasture, they actually come to you instead of running away. Okay, now paradigm change number 3. We're always talking about how we're mimicking nature, and I don't think we really have enough knowledge to be able to say we're actually doing that. Wild herds, we're always grazing at ultra high densities that we really, for some reason, have that down. We fence them in, we put them down, we try to get them 1 million pounds an acre. If there was no selective grazing, there was, if we're doing frequent moves from that, and we're thinking that the predators kept the animals bunched and moving, and that long recovery periods, rest periods of over a year were the norm. Well, if you can go back onto YouTube, go to the Mutual Omaha Wild Kingdoms videos, and boy, you've got all their episodes where, yeah, they are like that, but they get out of the breeding season and water holes start drying up and that, and they break out into smaller subherds. And those subherds are probably all family units. And they're also, all females, because that's what herbivores do, is they kick the males out. And
Bob?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. You've got it the wrong way round. In the wet season, they're in the family groups, scattered so that the predators can't get them. And then as the water holes dry up, as the dry season progresses, they come together at the permanent water points and the rivers. So as the dry season comes, they collect together, and that's when you get the big herds. During the wet season, they're in small little family units scattered over millions of acres. That's what we find with the buffalo and the
Well,
wildebeest.
yeah, well, I guess I kind of phrase it wrong. It's not the wet season. It's the time of the year when you've got good food and plenty of water. And it's when they're breeding. But to me, it's grass and water is what drives the whole thing. If an animal would just sit there and set stock graze like we do, they would starve to death. And they're going to move on their own. And what are the predators going to do? If they just stay there, they're going to starve because they didn't follow their lunch. And I'd like to see a study happen where they would go to where these animals are scattered out into the subherds and put the tags on them to where the GPS tags on them and on the predators, because I've got a strange suspicion that you've got a symbiotic relationship going on, that when they go into the mega herd, the predators follow them in, and I would almost bet money on it that when they break back out and that subherd comes back out as a family unit, that it's the same pack of predator or pride of predators following them out. But what I'm trying to get at here is we're saying that it's, that we've got this idea though that they're always in that, and as Roger pointed out, they're not always in that high density all the time. And in order to survive, they have to select for the most nutrition. So while the high intensity is really important at times, we also have to look at the nutrition. And if you've got a high diversity of plant life, what do you have out there? You've got areas there where you'll have one type of grass come up and it's at its nutritional peak, and as the animals move through, that's what they're going to get because they need the nutrition. And the feed quality and density is basically what determines your grazing density, because when you hit when these cattle are going along, once they've been rebooted, when they hit some good feed, they may change direction. It may change from the back of the herd. One of them on the back of the herd might notice something in a draw, and it will start down that, and that whole herd will reverse because they're going after the best feed. And when they're doing this, they're only taking that top third to one half of the plant. And what happens when you're taking the whole plant? What are you doing to that cow's rumen? You're forcing it to work harder to digest all that low quality feed, so you have more heat stress. And we just kind of recorded it. It just kind of accidentally turned into an experiment. We had pivots down here. They were Bermuda grass, and my boss took some, I took some, and I had mine going on an IMG deal. They were all together, and they would stay in the pivots 3 to 5 days longer than his would stay in a pivot with doing daily moves within the pivot. And at the end of it, my cattle would come out 3 to 5 days later, and half the feed was still standing. When we weighed them, they were identical on their gains. So when you're taking and forcing them to eat the lower quality forage, what we're doing is we're making that rumen work harder, and it has no real benefit. It has no benefit, and then it also slows down your plant recovery. So is this one of the targets that we shouldn't be hitting, is getting them to eat that lower part of that plant.
Got about 13 minutes, Bob.
Okay, I'm going. So that's the paradigm shift number 4. We need to have this. We need cattle which will do well on low quality feed. We need to change that. We need cattle which select for the most nutritious plants and parts of those plants as possible. And when you do that, your cattle are actually consuming less feed and for the same benefit. Then you're also getting faster plant recovery. So if you're getting faster plant recovery, that equates back out into being able to build more stockpiled grass for the winter. And we have another deal that, cattle are grazers, not browsers. We need to get away from that paradigm because cattle browse, and they'll browse a lot of the same thing that goats or sheep will. They will leave grass to do this. This plant right here is what they call javelina bush. And I put the cattle in here, and it was wintertime, so it didn't have any leaves. And as you can imagine, it just looks like a bunch of sticks. And over the other side of this sand dune, there was a lot of nice grass that wasn't oxidized. And I put these cows in here, and they spent the winter browsing on this, and they were in good shape. They didn't even hit their mineral tubs or their protein tubs. So we need to realize that if we give them the chance that they're going to browse other things, a lot of these desert ranches, you'll get onto an area where, you get everything gathered and you've got 3, 4, 5% of your cows that you're looking for. And you got to go in the brush and dig them out of the brush. And those cows wind up usually being the ones in the best condition. And that's because, especially in a drought, because they're in there going for the highest nutrition. So we need to kind of look at those cattle being able to control these woody plants that we think we need to control with chemicals or fire. Now, paradigm number 6 is we're looking at stress. And Jared, you've talked about this before. You've had your battle with it. A lot of us have had a battle with it. And we've all at least know of somebody who's had a friend or a spouse or relative that committed suicide, and nobody recognized that they had any stress. So if we cannot recognize stress in our friends and family that we love, how can we say that we recognize stress in the cattle? So we need to start going back to observing differently and thinking about stress different, and recognizing that when cattle start grazing away from each other, it is a stress response. And we need to recognize that even the way we feed cattle adds to that stress and takes away from the bottom line. I've had clients that have started, they're weaning their calves and bring them to the pens, sort the cows off, and then de-stress those cows in the pens and go right back out to a trap. And instead of feeding their cake, just going out there with a cake truck and hitting the siren and getting them come up around there and feeding them, what I've got them doing is they will go to part of the pasture where the animals can't see, and they'll lay that cake out in 2 or 3 lines. And then they'll go ahead and they'll go out and they'll get on their horse and they'll bump them over there. And now, knee-jerk reaction. This just takes too much time. But it adds a half a pound a day to your gain. So if you've got, 1,000 head of calves out there, and you're adding a half a pound a day gain, you're adding 500 pounds. You're adding another calf every day by doing that. And that's well worth an hour or even 2 hours of your time. So what we're looking at is we're going from extensive infrastructure to minimal infrastructure. We are going from non-selective grazing to the grazing selection being determined by the nutrient value of the plants. Now, we're going from slow plant recovery to faster plant recovery, and from daily moves to cattle constantly moving themselves based on feed density and quality. Now, I don't know about you. I think that that cow can make that determination as to how fast it needs to go through an area better than we do. And we need to change how we observe stress within cattle. Now, this picture here was from the mash doe in Kansas, and Chris Jorgensen was managing it. I'd done the school about a month before this. He played around with them a little bit, and he left for 9 days. And when he came back, this is how his cows were. So it's not something that takes more labor. It really can reduce your labor. And you can actually, if you want to put a little bit more trotting around time on your horse, you can actually do it in a lot of cases with your cattle scattered out on different brinkers. It takes more work, and your impact is going to be not quite as much, but you can still get started with it. Now, when I talk about the selective grazing for nutrition, and we talk about going back and, boy, you got to give it a rest. Now, this is a shot of Ricky Kremer's place there in Lusk, Wyoming. What she did this year, because, I've been talking about this stuff with her, and her husband Justin decided they're going to experiment with it. They gave half of the ranch totally off the growing season. And they went back and took all their herd, which they were running at almost triple stocking rate. So they took cattle from basically 3 ranches being grazed conventionally, and they took it across the other half of the ranch 3 times. And every time they were grazing something different. This picture right here is right after they pulled out of their 3rd time through this pasture, and it was like in August. And they still got a lot of feed left in there. But you can kind of see you've got this here, right here is an area where it's all the same type of grass, and it is mowed down to the same level. This over here is a little bit different, and it's at a different level. So they're going through and they're taking what is the optimum at that time, and they're not grazing the stuff that's still recovering. And that's because they only consume the top third of the plants. And her cows, I didn't put it on this presentation because I thought that it might go too long. She took a picture. Her cattle had to split up into 2 different water points because their water points aren't big enough. It was 107 degrees. Cottonwood trees down in the bottom of the draw, and both sets of cattle are setting up on the top, out in the sun, ruminating at 107 degrees, which that gives you a clue to what eating that top third of that plant does. And then when the top group of cattle started out to graze, the other ones, they just picked up and lined up and went up and joined them. So one of the things that I want you to take out from this is life is an experiment, and the world is your lab. Experiment with things. One of the things I'm not seeing people experiment with is they have some weeds and they want to spray it or put animal impact on it. They don't have enough animal impact. Well, you can go to Amazon and pick up soil biology, liquid soil biology, to put on those areas to improve your fertility and do away with your weeds. So that's just just one of many things that you can experiment with. Just don't drop one paradigm box to get into another paradigm box, because there's more out there than you could ever imagine. I mean, we're just touching the tip of the bucket on things. So any questions if I have time?
Beautiful. Yep, we probably got time for a question here before we jump into the next presenter. But definitely, folks, type in the chat what you've learned, what your takeaways are from Bob. Appreciate that you're willing to challenge our paradigms and break them a little bit.
Oh, I don't believe paradigms.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke, for your comment. So I guess my question within my context is on, well, I'll ask Ben the question because I'll visit with you later. Why do cattle not regraze the regrowth? Isn't that the most desirable feed? Why don't you go
No,
back to that second bite?
not unless that feed. It seems to be the most nutritious feed. You know, why do you swing by, you know, to get gas and, you know, you're kind of hungry? Why do you go in and pick up a Snickers bar and a Coke rather than going in and saying, okay, I'm going to go grab me a quick steak? It's convenience, it's laziness, it's stress. You don't feel that you have enough time to do that. So, you know, and cattle get into these habits. I mean, we have forced them into habits between our stockmanship and giving them supplements. We've really screwed them up. And it's amazing how fast that they will change. And like I say, that's why the IMG schools are 5 days long, is because you need a chance to watch them go through the process. And then you need to, if you're not sitting there going out, you know, watching me do a demonstration, watching other people trying to do it, and you doing it and getting talked through it, and unless you can keep going through that, chances are you're going to go home. And that's one of the things that I think why Bud had problems, is because you cannot teach feel through videos and lectures. And part of stockmanship is that innate feel of where to go. You need to be able to constantly be adjusting.
Very good. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. So on your website, you've got list of resources and schools. Also, Margot just put in the chat the offer that you have for folks, which is awesome, and we appreciate that. So check those things out. Check out his website, and we'll definitely stay in contact. Bob's a regular attendee at our webinars, and so appreciate this the support that you give to AgSteward, and we hope we can return that favor and send people your way, because this is a key part.
Well, this is something that, I mean, nobody can, you know, I'm not going to say nobody. A lot of people can't afford to go out. They're not going to go gamble their money away and take time away from the ranch to go with something that they're not sure about. And what you're doing is giving people a chance to ruminate on stuff for a little bit and be able to do it, you know. So
yep. Let's see. So the question real quick, how are the first 5 people? So basically the first 5 people that email you get the offer, right? Just kind of in order.
And I'll be honest about it. I won't say, well, I already did my 5, because it'll be kind of strange if nobody winds up taking it.
Okay.
But I have to do it to that, because I can't afford to go traveling around and work for free too much.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Bob. We appreciate that. And yeah, share your insights, share your epiphanies, share what you're going to do differently because of what we're learning here. Those are the key things.